From the JAMA Network, this is JAMA Author Interviews. Conversations with authors exploring the latest clinical research, reviews, and opinion featured in JAMA.
Hello, and welcome to this JAMA Author Interview podcast. I'm Dr. Kirsten Bibbins-Domingo, and I'm the editor-in-chief of JAMA and the JAMA Network. I'm joined today by Dr. Daniel Truhn. Dr. Truhn is a radiologist and a physicist by training. He's an AI researcher at the University Hospital Aachen in Germany. He's the senior author on a new study in JAMA, Comparative Analysis of Multimodal Large Language Model Performance on Clinical Vignette Questions. Welcome, Dr. Truhn.
Thank you very much for having me.
Wonderful. So this is such an interesting study. I'd like you to tell our listeners, what question were you interested in tackling when you set out to do this study?
Yes. So when you look at these new models which are coming out and which are developing really fast in recent years, I mean the large language models, you are fascinated by their abilities to reason and to kind of work with complex information. And as a radiologist, as a medical doctor, I'm of course mostly interested in how do these models perform in the medical domain. So can we use these models to infer diagnoses from given information, for example?
And you were interested in, we've already known these models seem to be able to take medical tests and do so with a high degree of accuracy. But you're interested in this study in a more complex set of questions, which really have to do with images.
Exactly. So when GPT-4 Vision came out, which is a model which can both work with language and images as input, that was a natural way to tackle the questions that have been published, for example, in the New England Journal of Medicine and in JAMA, where you have these kind of very broad and very extensive case descriptions, and you need to find the correct diagnosis. And this is perfectly suited to be used in conjunction with these models because there you have images as well as text. And we were interested in how well do these new models perform, and do they perform much better than the models which had no access to the images before.
Wonderful. So you're looking at two article types in the New England Journal of Medicine. These are their image challenges. And in JAMA, these are our clinical challenges. And for these article types, there's generally an image, a description of the case, and then there's a question. What would you do next? Or what is the diagnosis? Something like that. And you essentially ask different large language models whether they could answer the question.
Exactly. That's what we did. So you have like the king of the large language models, which is GPT-4 Vision, which is largely recognized as being one of the most advanced ones. And then you have also publicly available large language models, which are more interesting to us as researchers and probably also as medical people in the long term, because these can be installed on site and can be used without having to send all of our data to OpenAI, for example, the owner of GPT-4 Vision. So that's why we compared this standard, or the model for which you expect the most and the highest performance, to the other models which are publicly available and could be used on site.
That's a really interesting distinction. Let's get back to that at the end. Why don't you tell me the main results? What did you find?
We found, unsurprisingly, that giving the models, in this case GPT-4 Vision, access to the images next to the case description, textual case description, improved their performance quite drastically. And that models which had no access or had no intrinsic mechanism to process images performed worse, which is understandable if you look at the clinical vignette questions that we examined, so the case descriptions. And often a decisive clue is found in these images. So you would expect that models which have access to the images work better. And that's exactly what we found. We also found that large language models, which are large in the sense they have a lot of weights and they have been trained on a lot of data, perform better than models which had been trained on smaller amounts of data and which have smaller amount of weights, which are smaller in the sense that you need less storage to store them and which are less powerful. Also, that was expected, of course.
Was there anything surprising in the findings?
No, I would say the results that we have produced are more or less expected. So we didn't find any large surprises in these things. What we found, however, was, and that is of course known, that sometimes these models tend to hallucinate or tend to give false explanations for their answers. And that is certainly something that needs to be tackled in the future.
So you observed that as well in your findings?
We also observed that, yeah.
I see. I noticed that these models performed slightly better with the New England Journal of Medicine challenges than the JAMA challenges. Why would that be? Any speculation there?
It might just be that the JAMA clinical challenges are more complex in the sense that more information needs to be compiled in order to find the diagnosis. That is one hypothesis that you could state. And it might also be because we didn't have any control over what training data had been used, that maybe the training data that GPT-4 had been using during its training phase had access to more information which was more related to the New England Journal of Medicine challenges, for example.
Interesting. You make a point that the models that performed less well are the models, though, that are more likely to be that we would be using in clinical settings for a range of reasons. Talk about that a little bit more.
Yes, I think, as we all know, medical data is very sensitive. We don't want to give that data away to big companies who could then use it in a way which is not controlled by us. And even if they ensure us that this will not be the case, you never trust them 100% completely. That's one of the main reasons why you want to have these models, which you can control, and you have full control over these models when they are on site, and you have to install them on site on servers in your clinical hospital. Also, I think in the end, it will be a cost issue. So if you have one large model which can really perform very well, but has kind of a monopoly, then it can, of course, charge any amount. Everybody probably wants to have it. But if you have a competition between models, then not only you will have an more economic benefit in the sense that prices are more fairly distributed, but also I think that you then have a better incentive to improve your models. And that's another reason why I think that it is very important to pursue and to improve these publicly available large language models.
Wonderful. So I think your work is really a snapshot of one point in time for how these models perform. This is obviously a rapidly evolving area, and there's a lot of interest in having these models improve. I think what I hear you saying in the end is that there are reasons to hope that many of the other models that didn't perform as well could be improved because that is how they might actually be used in clinical practice.
Exactly. And when you have a publicly available model, you have thousands and thousands of researchers diving into the details and trying to improve those models. While when you have one model which is developed in a closed environment and by only a few researchers, admittedly very good researchers, you might miss maybe some things that the open source community of researchers can find and can use to improve. So I think that's also one of the reasons why these open source models should be used in the future, just to make use of all the human capital that can work on these models.
Wonderful. So interesting. Well, thank you very much. And I hope that you're continuing to do this work and we'll see more of it in the future in this rapidly evolving field. I've been joined today by Dr. Daniel Truhn, who's a radiologist and an AI researcher at the University Hospital Aachen in Germany. And we've been discussing his new paper in JAMA, Comparative Analysis of Multimodal Large Language Model Performance on Clinical Vignette Questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kirsten.